flesh is weaponized. It's Videodrome and cattle decapitation for the first episode. Let's go. Hello everyone and welcome to Heavy as Film, the show that is all about connecting heavy metal music and heavy metal cinema. I'm your host Kilgore and this is it. This is the first official film in this project of building the heavy metal cinema canon. Now if you haven't checked out the intro episode to this show, episode 0, I recommend you do. It's the episode right before this one. It's about 45 minutes long and it's really helpful if you want to understand what this show is about. If you didn't check it out, I recommend you listen to it before listening to this episode, but if you're thinking, I'm not going to do that, I'm just a really big fan of Videodrome and cattle decapitation, then that's cool too. Real briefly, this show is about identifying specific films that qualify as heavy metal cinema. I break them down and analyze what makes them metal according to a critical framework of metal as a mode of art. Then, I map the film to a specific metal music subgenre. Finally, I identify the band that best represents this film, whether it's functionally, structurally, textually, subtextually, or preferably all of those. Now, a quick note about band and subgenre pairings for film, because this is based on more than just vibes. I'm going to claim with evidence that Videodrome is a Deathgrind film. I'm going to claim with some evidence based on function and structure that the band Cattle Decapitation, which I'm not saying is purely and exclusively a Deathgrind band, they are the best metal band pairing for the film Videodrome based on analysis and evidence beyond a simple vibe check. Based on what Cattle Decapitation's music does and how it does those things, I think this pairing works, and I think you will too. What I'm most confident in and why this is going to work is the evidence I'll present and the actual theory of metal as a mode that I've developed. In the first episode, in episode 0, I talked about the framework I've written to define the metal mode in such a way that it captures all subgenres of metal, leaving nothing out, and can be extended to cinema. The best way to summarize the theory of metal that we're applying in this show for the project here is this. Metal is a cross-medium mode of art. It doesn't stick to just music. It can appear in film too. It's a mode because it's a way of structurally organizing art to support a function, using tone, structure, and style to produce its effects. Metal is also a genre because it's a collection of works of art that share a similar functional purpose and structural organization. This means that metal is defined by its function and structure. Functionally, metal stages an existential confrontation. The confrontation is existential in the sense that it must be forced and it must determine if its subjects can continue existing as they were before the confrontation. Structurally, it achieves this through conflict as the central organizing principle, employing subgenre-specific stylistic devices and displaying dedication to craft. I spent a lot of time discussing how confrontation and conflict in metal are not required to be literally narrative conflict or explicit in order to qualify, so check out that episode 0 for more on the varied nature of confrontation and conflict in the metal mode. Critically, I also laid out the difference between a film being metal and a film being heavy. And this is what separates this podcast from other shows about metal music and films. According to my theory of metal, a piece of art, whether film or music, it either operates in the metal mode or it doesn't. And it can operate in other modes as well as metal, and that's fine. Metal is not an exclusive mode, but metal itself is a binary, not a spectrum. Heaviness, on the other hand, is a spectrum. Heaviness is the subjective measure of a piece of art's impact on us personally. We might experience a piece of art as being kind of heavy or heavy as fuck, but metal doesn't equal heaviness. So in this show, we are not conflating the two terms. This is a show about identifying metal cinema, not subjective rankings of how heavy those metal films are. That's basically it. That's my pitch for the existence of a cross-medium functional and structural theory of metal as a mode. In episode 0, I went deep into the functional and structural characteristics of metal, the staging of confrontation as the primary function of metal, the nature of conflict as the central organizing principle that metal is built around to achieve its function, the ability of metal to allow for subgenre scaffolding in both film and music while still achieving its primary function, and how conflict is necessary but not sufficient alone for a piece of music or a film to be metal. I went into some examples of films and music that involve conflict and confrontation, but not in a central role, so they don't qualify as operating in the metal mode. There's a lot in episode 0 to set up the theory of metal as a mode that is as airtight as I can make it. From this point onward, I'm going to assume that you, the listener, are aware of that, have listened to episode 0, so that when I start classifying films as metal, you know by what framework I'm making that classification. All right, let's talk Videodrome, the first film that is going in the heavy metal cinema canon, and it is an amazing film. If you haven't seen Videodrome, you should. On this show, I'm not going to concern myself with spoiler warnings when discussing the plot and themes of a film. So this is your spoiler warning. Videodrome is also more than 40 years old at this point, so, what are you waiting for? In order to analyze these films, we kind of have to talk about spoilers, so if that bothers you, go ahead, pause here, go watch Videodrome, then come back. This is a film by David Cronenberg, the Canadian auteur-filmmaker, who is best known for being at the forefront, really doing significant work to originate and catapult body horror as a subgenre of film. Some of his other popular films you might know, even as a casual horror movie fan, include Scanners from 1981, The Fly with Jeff Goldblum from 1986, and A History of Violence from 2005. As of this year, early 2026, his last film to date was The Shrouds from 2024. Lots of great movies in the Cronenberg catalog. What Cronenberg does that is very metal is he elevates body horror intellectually. His films are not just gore fests. These are philosophical pieces of art that use body horror as a means of examining the relationship between the physical body and something beyond that. There's some spiritual or mental or emotional or otherwise extra-physical connection between the self and the body. On top of that intellectual elevation of the body horror genre, the actual body horror effects, especially the practical effects, are really good. Just incredible. The Cronenberg films are really emblematic of that dedication to craft that's present in metal. Obsession and dedication to craft is one of the structural elements that's the hallmark of metal art, and that quality is definitely evident in Videodrome. The practical effects, the set design, just everything you're looking at in this film holds up so well even by today's standards. I don't spend a lot of time on visual aesthetics in my analysis of these metal films because the whole point of my theory of metal is that by transcending medium, metal's definition goes beyond aesthetics. Metal itself is not just grotesque. However, the visual aesthetics in this film represent something bigger. The effects, the set design, even the performances really satisfy that criterion in the framework of showing dedication to craft and obsession. The ethos of this film's craft is metal. The effects are top tier, and there's so much to unpack thematically with this film. It's really anything but lazy. It's excellent. So, Videodrome came out in 1983, and it's one of the films that Cronenberg wrote as well as directed. Before talking any more about what specifically about this film makes it metal, let's do a quick plot summary. Again, if you haven't seen it, spoiler alert. I'm going to do a quick plot summary of the films at the beginning of these episodes to kind of ground the analytical conversation and take note of some of the specific components of the film that are going to be important to the analysis of what makes the film metal. I'm not going to literally recap every single scene, so this is really not a substitute for actually watching the movie. This show is primarily analysis and not summary, but if it's been a while since you've seen the movie, then this will at least be a good refresher for you. So in the beginning of Videodrome, we meet Max Wren, awoken by a personalized message from his TV, really introducing us to this theme of changing the human experience through technology. We get the message from the theme that this is, quote, civic TV, the one you take to bed with you. After eating some leftover pizza crust and smearing pizza sauce on some softcore pornographic screenshots he's reviewing, we realize that this is part of his work. He goes to meet with a gentleman about purchasing some programming for a TV station. Max shows some of the scenes of the show to other executives at the TV station he works at, but it's not really what they're looking for. They're becoming bored of the classy, softer representations of sex. So Max goes to see someone who he's been paying to covertly monitor broadcasts of potentially more illicit, hardcore content. And this clandestine operation between Max and his signal pirate acquaintance, Harlan, leads them to discover a program called Videodrome. They only have a few seconds of Videodrome, but Max is interested because it is extreme. Videodrome appears to be a television program featuring depraved sex and violence with no plot. So Harlan continues to monitor the signal for Max. We meet some other important characters. Nikki Brand is a sort of self-help radio program host who, from what we can tell from a single scene of her radio program, she appears to be kind of gaslighting her callers into calling a distress line. She becomes sexually involved with Max, or romantically involved if you like, but I think we're not supposed to be able to tell if it's actually a romance according to modern sensibilities. That's kind of the point. She is very into S&M and aggressive physical sexuality, and is very interested in Videodrome when Max shows her a tape of it at his apartment. We also meet Brian Oblivion, like O''Oblivion, who is described as a media prophet. Oblivion is used to present a lot of the film's philosophical ideas about what television, and more broadly what technology, can be used to achieve in human evolution. He believes that television is a way to augment the human experience through altering our perception, even saying later, there is nothing real outside our perception of reality. We're going to talk a lot about perception and reality. We get into this section of the plot where Max becomes obsessed with Videodrome. He wants it for his TV station, so he tries to contact people who are involved with its production. Meanwhile, Nikki Brand's obsession with Videodrome leads her to travel to Pittsburgh alone to become a contestant on the show. It's actually never clear if the show is a competition, but contestant is the word they use to describe the participation. It still appears, frankly, that the show Videodrome has no plot or competitive element to it. It's just sex and violence and torture. Max actually begins hallucinating while watching the pirate recordings of Videodrome, and learns through Brian Oblivion's daughter, Bianca Oblivion, more about the actual nature of the show. Bianca Oblivion gives Max some tapes of her father Brian that lead us to some of the more Cronenbergian special effects sequence of Max hallucinating. And Max is eventually brought to the actual man behind Videodrome to learn more about the nature of its existence. One Barry Convex. After some scenes where Max continues to be manipulated by Barry Convex, Max learns that Barry Convex and his friend Harlan are working together to test Videodrome on Max, and we learn what Videodrome is really for and what it does to people. This is where people, the viewers, tend to get potentially confused about what the reveal is and what the plot of this movie really is. Max is hallucinating while watching Videodrome because the Videodrome signal induces hallucinations in the viewer. These hallucinations cause a brain tumor after prolonged exposure. The brain tumor becomes a way for those behind Videodrome, like Barry Convex, to perpetuate the Videodrome signal inside someone and use it to essentially control them through continued hallucinations without needing for them to be actively watching the Videodrome program anymore. So Max, now under control of Barry Convex because he has been watching so much Videodrome and now he has this tumor, he is told to go murder the other people at his TV station so Convex can plant his own people at the TV station who will get Videodrome on the air, leading to Barry Convex and his company eventually reprogramming multitudes of North Americans to achieve their vision of a perfect society. Reprogramming them, remember, by changing their biology, by creating this brain tumor that can be used to control them. This is certainly something that we are going to heavily analyze in terms of this film as a metal film. Max murders his partners at the station, and he is also told to murder Bianca Oblivion because of disagreements between Barry Convex's mission and the Oblivion philosophy. But at what is pretty much the beginning of the film's insane final sequence, Bianca uses a Videodrome signal tape to reprogram Max for her own purposes. Max is now a weapon of Bianca, and we get the famous line, "Turn against Videodrome, you'll use the weapons they've given you to destroy them. Death to Videodrome, long live the new flesh." Max, now reprogrammed, goes and assassinates Barry Convex, hallucinating all the while, some incredibly Cronenberg body horror effects. The film ends when Max receives a final order from Bianca to kill himself to become the new flesh. He has to kill the old flesh. So, long live the new flesh, Max kills himself, end of movie. Alright. I managed to keep my notes on plot summary to about 1 page typed, and that was not easy for this film. The pacing in this film is insane. If it sounds like a lot is happening in this movie, it's because a lot is happening in this movie. I had to leave stuff out, and there are just so many scenes. The plot begins in minute 1, and it does not let up until literally the very last shot of the film with Max killing himself. This film, by the way, 89 minutes. It does not even crack an hour and a half. There is an insane amount of plot twists, disturbing imagery, and philosophy crammed into an 89-minute film. So now we're going to talk about exactly why this film is metal. Remember, we have 3 goals. Goal 1, prove that Videodrome is metal. Goal 2, prove it fits in a certain subgenre. Goal 3, pair Videodrome with a band. Okay, let's get started with goal 1. This film is visually disturbing, but our experience alone doesn't qualify a film as metal. It's not just metal because of how it looks or feels. The visuals and tone of this movie do leave you with an impression of just having seen something that you shouldn't have seen. It definitely carries that feeling of something that's forbidden. There's definitely metal imagery that leaves a great heavy metal first impression. There's the shot of screws coming out of Max's fingertips to make his gun a part of his body. There's the hole in Max's stomach where he hallucinates people shoving Videodrome tapes inside him to give him orders. There's a lot of crazy body horror stuff that I already mentioned is where we find the obsession and dedication to craft that supports the metal classification for this film. You could definitely design some metal band t-shirts out of Videodrome screenshots. But what really makes this film metal is its function and structure. Recall that aesthetics, how we perceive the art, doesn't define the art. Our experience of the film is a result of the film achieving its function, as it was designed to do. So, according to the framework, the function of metal is to stage existential confrontation. Structurally, it achieves this through conflict as the central organizing principle, as well as dedication to craft and subgenre-specific stylistic devices. Videodrome is metal because its primary function as a piece of art is to stage confrontation. Remember, the primary function of a piece of art is what it is structurally organized to achieve, regardless of intent. Function and structure are inextricably linked in this way, and when we comment on the function and structure of a film, we're not characterizing the intent of its creator. So let's characterize the confrontation in Videodrome and show that all other themes and messages and functions of the film are only either secondary to or byproducts of that confrontation. Now, the confrontation in Videodrome can actually be framed more traditionally than it initially appears, especially if you've only seen the film once. There are entities at war, they fight on a battlefield, and the conflict is mediated through some means. The confrontation in Videodrome, on Max Wren's level, is a fight for control over the human body between an individual and this megacorporation, Spectacular Optical. Structurally, Videodrome is organized around a war being fought on the battlefield of the body. The body is both the battlefield and the ultimate prize of the conflict in Videodrome. In the world of Videodrome, Barry Convex and his company, Spectacular Optical, seek to control the masses and change them, to shape them in their ideal image. So how does Convex do this? How does Convex win the battle for flesh? Through the Videodrome signal, an individual like Max Wren is assaulted. He doesn't know it at first, but the Videodrome signal is a Trojan horse. He's intrigued by it. It turns Nicky Brand on, but all the while there is a war inside their flesh for their flesh, and they are losing the war. He's losing control over his own body because the Videodrome signal is, yes, causing these hallucinations, but more importantly, it's causing the tumor that will allow Convex to control him through permanently altering his perceptions. Asking questions about why people like Max and Nicky are even interested at all in Videodrome is a secondary function of the film that only exists because the Videodrome signal is being used to assault Max and Nicky, preserving the functional centering of confrontation. The war in Videodrome is not a war for control of land. It's a war for the control of flesh, and the conflict is mediated through perception. What Max experiences physically is inseparable from his perceptions because perception is his reality. Changing perception is the means by which Convex changes Max's reality. He controls his reality, alters his body, and wins control over Max. This exploration of perception versus reality is only even made possible through the functional centering of staging confrontation, because the attack on Max's perceptions is what prompts this exploration in the first place. As a quick note on Cronenberg, a lot of his films involve connecting the body, connecting your physical self to something deeper about your identity, to something spiritual or metaphysical. In Videodrome, control over the body is used to separate individuals from their flesh and to weaponize their bodies, and it's achieved through manipulating perception. So on an individual level, we now have combatants. They are Spectacular Optical and Max Wren, who really acts as a kind of audience stand-in. We are experiencing this film through Max Wren. We experience his hallucinations with him. The battlefield is the human body, and control of the individual's flesh is the object of the conflict. The war is fought through control of perception. And this is key to the conflict itself, perception. The film unsubtly tells us this many times. We have Brian Oblivion explicitly state, quote, "The television screen has become the retina of the mind's eye." And more critically, to lock down the film's thesis around perception as a means to win a fight for control, perception as a tool to support the staging of confrontation. We also have Oblivion state later, quote, "There is nothing real outside our perception of reality." It's easy to miss some of this the first time around because this film is really, I cannot understate this, this film is batshit insane. Right after Oblivion drops that line about there being nothing real outside our perception of reality, Max Wren opens up a 7-inch vertical slit in his abdomen and shoves a gun inside it. So this film is a constant assault on the viewer, as well as Max, by a dystopian corporate quest for control. The plot points and twists and turns of this story are punctuated by truly deeply unsettling and disturbing imagery that really leaves no breathing room for us to sit with some of these Oblivion lines, because he drops some philosophy on us and then we're back to shoving things inside a hole in our abdomen. There is no fat on the bone in this movie, and that is going to be particularly important in discussing this film as being structurally metal after we're finished with function. A final note on the conflict for control of the body, because it seems like a lot of people kind of trip and fall over the actual mechanics of how Videodrome works, just conceptually. The first time I watched this, I would admit that I was so stunned by the film that I didn't fully grasp how it all works, how the Videodrome signal works in the narrative. There is an explanation in the film, but the film is also laid out to be a kind of mystery, and there are some misdirects in there as well, so we get information in bits and pieces until a more complete reveal. In case it wasn't totally clear, the Videodrome signal is a weapon. The signal can be broadcast through any image. It can be broadcast through those colorful test bars, if they want. I can't remember what that's called, but on TV. It can be broadcast through any image. The Videodrome program has been designed around this hyper-violent, hyper-sexualized content because that kind of content, they explain in the film, opens up the viewer to be more susceptible to the actual weaponized signal being broadcast. This signal induces hallucinations, and prolonged exposure induces a brain tumor that can be used to perpetuate the Videodrome signal without actually broadcasting a television program. So the tumor is now the tool of control that Barry Convex can use to induce more hallucinations, thereby controlling your perception of reality, which, remember, is equivalent to controlling your reality, thereby controlling you, controlling your flesh. Flesh is weaponized. Staging the confrontation for control of flesh is what makes this film functionally a metal film, because staging this conflict is the function of the film. Every structural element of this film that we'll discuss exists to support the centering of this conflict. Every theme this film touches on comes from this conflict. There is no structural element of this film that doesn't serve the function of staging this battle for control of the flesh. Videodrome is showing us people whose whole livelihood depends on television. There are special tapes made for people to wake them up in the morning. We witness the effect of hyperviolent content being broadcast to people. But does the film exist to explore these topics as its primary function? No, it doesn't. Any questions that we, the viewers, are forced to ask ourselves about the prevalence of hyperviolent content in media are questions that result from the system of hyperviolent media attacking and controlling Max Renn. Any questions that we, the viewers, ask ourselves about the role of media and television in society, we're only asking ourselves those questions because of how the confrontation between those forces and Max plays out in the film. Remember, from the critical framework of metal as a mode, metal doesn't inquire, it exposes. This film's primary function is not to question the role of media in society. Its primary function is to expose the role of media in society as a tool of radicalization by demonstrating that role through existential confrontation. The confrontation is both central to the film, and it's also existential because the confrontation determines if Max Renn can remain as he was before the confrontation. It is therefore functionally a metal film. Now, there is a broader conflict taking place in the world of the film. That is the conflict between Barry Convex and the Oblivions. This is an ideological war over what Videodrome should be used for. I kind of glossed over it and didn't really address it in the summary, but it's the answer to the question of why any of this is really happening in the plot. Brian Oblivion was someone who worked with Spectacular Optical and Barry Convex to develop the Videodrome signal, and essentially they had a falling out over the ideological goals of Videodrome. Oblivion viewed television, and by extension tools like the Videodrome signal, as a means to further the evolution of man as a technological animal, whereas Convex represents Spectacular Optical's goal to use Videodrome to shape man, to shape the North American people into their own image of the ideal race. The overarching conflict in this film is being won by this really dark, techno-biological fascist movement to homogenize the North American people. The film takes place in Toronto, in case you didn't catch that. That's why they keep talking about North America. That conflict, the greater conflict between the North American people and fascist biopolitics, is going to be extremely important in justifying the subgenre of metal for this film. But we'll get to subgenre. In any case, functionally, this film is metal. The primary purpose that this art is organized to fulfill is the staging of this existential, transformational confrontation. If we remove that existential confrontation from the film, we're not left with much of anything. So, check. I've outlined in my framework that metal is functional and structural. So in addition to the film's function of staging the conflict for control of the body, a note on structure and why this film is structurally metal. The function of the film is to stage the conflicts as previously described. Structurally, everything in the film is organized to support this function, and conflict is that central organizing principle. Every major plot point, every disturbing visual, every tool of the film's body horror subgenre, every hallucination that Max suffers, it all serves the function of staging this confrontation. First of all, there is not a single scene in this film in which Max just has a casual chat with someone. Every interaction is a battle of some kind. Whether it's a negotiation with Harlan or Bianca, or this character Masha, who we haven't really even gotten to, or if it's a literal confrontation with Harlan or Barry Convex, Max is constantly fighting these intellectual, these physical, these ideological battles. He even battles himself for control over his own body while afflicted with hallucinations. He has these confrontations when he's just sitting in his apartment alone. He doesn't shove a gun into his guts because it's a good time. He is losing his autonomy. He is losing the war for his own flesh. Even the scenes with Max and Nikki Brand are confrontations of a sort. These are extremely tense scenes. The tension is between Max, who is drawn to Videodrome and is intrigued by it, but recognizes it as dangerous and illicit, and something that he personally doesn't want to be involved with, even if he wants to profit from it and be involved with it on a professional level, versus Nikki Brand, who is all in on Videodrome as a consumer. She is intellectually stimulated by it. She is sexually stimulated by it. She is just all in and pulls Max further in as well. This entire film is a war. Every scene is a battle. This film is therefore structurally metal, just right on the surface. It's there. So, goal 1, achieved. Functionally and structurally, Videodrome is metal. Therefore, Videodrome is metal. Okay, now, on to other supporting elements of structure other than conflict, as conflict is clearly the central organizing principle of the film. When we dive further into the structure of the film, beyond conflict as its central organizing principle, we get a little deeper into the specific tools that this film uses to structure itself that support a subgenre classification. That is, a subgenre of metal. Here is where we start to get into dangerous territory. I'm going to make some claims about what the metal subgenre of Deathgrind does and how it does those things. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list of the functional and structural elements of Deathgrind. Remember from episode 0 what Dostoevsky said about reality being unclassifiable. Videodrome is not a 25-minute long splatter film gore fest. But remember how the cross-medium functional and structural theory of metal works. It's not only about aesthetics. It's not only about how we experience metal. It's about what metal does and how metal does those things. For subgenres especially, that's when we get heavily into how metal achieves things through structure. Now, just to give a little general background on Deathgrind, it's definitely an extreme subgenre of metal. Its name comes from blending death metal and grindcore. Death metal and grindcore are both traditionally heavy and extreme subgenres in their own right, but what Deathgrind does as a subgenre that makes it special is that it takes some of the most interesting features of death metal and grindcore and combines them to create a particularly intense sound. Grindcore is known for prioritizing intensity over technicality through incorporating elements of noise music, for example. But when that intensity is combined with aspects of technicality and songwriting found in death metal, you arrive at Deathgrind. That's a general overview of the Deathgrind subgenre, and there's obviously a rich history of bands and music behind the subgenre. I want to focus on some specific structural elements that Videodrome utilizes to support its function that we also find in typical Deathgrind music. For one, pacing. The pacing of this film, I think I've mentioned it, is relentless. This film has a relatively short runtime and uses every minute of it. Videodrome absolutely burns through 89 minutes. I think it is impossible to be bored during this film. Even in that one really weird scene that kind of just visually feels like it comes out of nowhere, it feels out of phase somehow, like aesthetically out of phase with the rest of the film. It's the one where Max and Masha are talking at that restaurant. Just boom, boom, new scene, new developments, just constantly constant turnover in the scenes until we get to Max's forced recorded hallucination by Barry Convex. And at that point, we're really just off the rails. Especially the last 15 to 20 minutes of this film is a rage of hallucinatory, stylized violence and gore. There's really no denouement outside of Max shooting himself. The last 15 to 20 minutes is sustained climax. It's paced, it's shot, it's acted, it's edited all expertly to keep the energy turned up to 11. In metal terms, that ending is a constant blast beat. All acceleration, no deceleration. We go from exposure to Videodrome to the internalization of Videodrome to the weaponization by Videodrome, and we pick up the real story during all this, but there's nothing beyond weaponization. The structure is pure escalation of conflict, and this is very characteristic of Deathgrind. It is relentless. It is somatic. It's more precise and technical than grindcore. It's clinical, really. Now, the body here is both the battlefield and the narrative. As the film escalates, Max's bodily transformations via his hallucinations also escalate. Videodrome is not a Deathgrind film just because it's a body horror film, though. Yes, the aesthetics match. Our experience of Videodrome aligns relatively well with how Deathgrind is experienced. Deathgrind music features themes like body horror and gore and hellish visions and all that, and it's disturbing and it's abrasive, like Videodrome is, but our theory of metal states that subgenre is defined by structural, stylistic discrepancies between pieces of art within an overall primary structure of conflict as the central organizing principle. So what are those supporting structural elements in Deathgrind? That's what we need to identify. One of them is pacing, and we've laid out the similarities here, that the film is paced incredibly fast. If there's one thing that identifies Deathgrind, it's that relentlessness. Deathgrind is compressed, albeit not as compressed as pure grindcore. Typically, Deathgrind track runtimes are on the shorter side, and there are exceptions, of course. But when you think Deathgrind, you think relentless speed for brief periods of time, then it's over. It's an explosion. It's high pressure and low volume. And this film is that. We've laid that out now. There's no breathing room in stereotypical Deathgrind, no wasted seconds. You don't get a minute to think and soak in the atmosphere. And in Videodrome, you don't get that either. It's all build up in tension, no release. This isn't as simple, though, as Deathgrind songs are short, Videodrome is short, therefore Videodrome is Deathgrind. It's about what the art is doing with that runtime. There is so much going on in Videodrome over the course of 89 minutes. And actually, you know what? I've seen that there's an 89-minute cut and an 87-minute cut of Videodrome. So maybe even shorter, depending on which one you've seen. But there's so much information in this film. There's so much philosophy about the nature of technology as a tool of creating a post-human human. So much horror and conflict. That's not an accident. Videodrome and Deathgrind don't just commit to brevity, they commit to density. Take that 89-minute movie, take that 89-second long song, and shove as much in there as possible. Overwhelm people. Use the structure as a tool to overwhelm and disorient the person who is the audience to the art. And don't give anyone any time to process what is going on. You, the viewer, are strapped into this ride, and there is no exit ramp until you get catapulted off at the last second. That experience is designed. Which brings us now to violence as a tool to support the functional mission of both Videodrome and Deathgrind. The film's treatment of violence as a structural tool of the art is a very Deathgrind thing. Violence of some kind is going to be present in a lot of these metal films. Not all of them, but it's present in a lot of metal music, so it makes sense that there is some violent component to a lot of these films. We've mentioned that some metal art doesn't feature violence, and still, it's functionally and structurally a confrontation. It's possible. And those are going to be very interesting films to explore. But that comes later, because violence is very much present in Videodrome and Deathgrind. So let's look at what the function of the violence is and see if it matches between Videodrome and Deathgrind. We get the full Deathgrind treatment of violence in this film. The violence is grotesque, and most importantly, it is transformational. It's not just mindless gore in Videodrome, and it's not just mindless gore in Deathgrind either. It's personal. There is an individualized aspect to the horror and violence present in the Deathgrind genre, where violence is done to you and it changes you. Violence is a tool of transforming something from a pure state to an impure state, and it's at its most powerful and evocative in Deathgrind when it actually does not lead to death. Instead, it leads to something that is potentially worse. It leads to transformation, which, as we've pointed out, transformation is still existential. The violence creates some new horror that hadn't existed before. Violence as a tool of transformation is what makes it structural. This is the key. This isn't how violence is treated in every metal film or every subgenre, but in Videodrome and in the Deathgrind subgenre, this is a primary use of violence. Even the psychic violence done by Barry Convex and the Videodrome signal, and then the physical violence that this psychic violence causes Max to do to himself and others. It all stacks. It is part of the structure of this film. It is what transforms Max. Every transformation in this film, every transformation of Max's body is the direct result of an act of violence. And this escalates the conflict in the film. He is under assault by the Videodrome signal, and it changes him. This is very Deathgrind, a transformative assault that doesn't just erase the victim, it changes the victim into some unimaginable new horror. And to make it even more Deathgrind, we don't get closure. Not really, because Max kills himself, but we don't even get to see it. This is an audio-visual medium, and we only get to hear the shot ring out, followed by the credits. There's no closure, there's only ongoing, persistent horror. That is also very characteristic of Deathgrind. The body as infrastructure to be shaped, to be weaponized, to be stolen from you by someone else for malicious intent, to be changed and manipulated like a common tool of violence through acts of violence. The pacing, the tone, the treatment of violence, these are not just flashy stylistic choices. These are structural tools that serve the film's function of staging a war for control of the flesh. This is systems thinking applied to flesh. Importantly, it's not the same treatment other subgenres give ideas like violence. Violence in Videodrome and Deathgrind is not occupation. It's not a tool of resistance. It's not duty. It's not inevitable. It's a clinical, scientifically applied violence to systematically weaponize flesh. So we've achieved 2 out of 3 goals here so far. We've shown that Videodrome is categorically metal, and moreover, we've shown that it fits reasonably well into the Deathgrind subgenre. Goal 3, map this film onto a specific band, which brings us to the great Cattle Decapitation. Again, I am not saying that Cattle Decapitation is the essential Deathgrind band. I fully recognize that they have their own sound outside of the purest interpretation of the Deathgrind label. They are their own musicians. For Videodrome, we need a band, though, that does what Videodrome does. We need a band that can cram an insane amount of content in brief bursts of ramping tension. We need a band that understands violence in the same way that Videodrome does and employs it structurally to support a mission in the same way that Videodrome does. A band that knows how to use violence as a systemic tool of transformation in a war over control of the self. Cattle Decapitation understands all of the thematic, functional, structural, and as a bonus, aesthetic tools and results of Videodrome. When we make claims about bands pairing well with movies, I of course cannot say that every piece of music that Cattle Decapitation has put out over a career of now some 30 years is perfectly in line with Deathgrind as a subgenre or Videodrome as a movie. That would be ridiculous. Bands change subgenres over 30 years, things evolve, and remember, reality cannot be classified. I can also already hear legions of metalheads saying, Cattle Decapitation isn't Deathgrind, it's technical death metal, or their early stuff is grindcore, ... or whatever. All of those infinitely divisible subgenres, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with metal being infinitely divisible. Bands are individual cases. We could take subgenre classification to its logically absurd conclusion, and we could give every single metal band its own subgenre, or we could argue endlessly about to what degree we should even be pursuing subgenre classification. Two extreme ends of the argument, but we're not going to do that. I'm going to make an argument that regardless of metal sociology, the band Cattle Decapitation and the film Videodrome are significantly aligned in their function and structure, especially considering that Videodrome was released in 1983, more than 10 years before Cattle Decapitation got started, and the band has had about a 30-year history. Functionally, the film Videodrome stages a battle for the control of flesh, using the body as a battlefield and transforming it in the process. This kind of idea, transforming the body in horrific and violent ways, transforming humans into tools, using conflict to apply narrative structure to transformational body horror, this is central lyrically and thematically to much of the Cattle Decapitation catalog. Many entries in the Cattle Decapitation catalog feature a lot of slaughterhouse imagery and focus on visceral descriptions of torture and murder as part of a pro-animal rights angle that they take. A lot of these entries have a maximum gross-out effect that illustrates the brutality of the meat industry, mixing the imagery of animals being slaughtered with humans being slaughtered as well. One such example can be found on the 1999 EP Human Jerky, which is an insane title. From the track Bovine, Swine, and Human Rinds, we have the lyrics, quote, "Deep in the butchery, spurs a concoction of human innards, sautéed and boiled with poultry and swine." And then later on, quote, "Blistered and cauterized stench of burnt flesh, of bovine and swine and sapien rinds." So what an example like this shows is Cattle Decapitation's ability from early on in their career to really characterize violence against the body as part of a system. It is targeted, it is clinical, with a point, with a purpose. There is systemic violence against living flesh perpetuated by this butchery, and it's not random violence. Now, Videodrome is not making a point about animal rights like Cattle Decapitation is, but there is a functional similarity in the staging of conflict as a torturous application of systemized violence against the individual. And there's a structural similarity in how the conflict is staged as a transformation of the flesh. Social and political angles aside, both Videodrome and Cattle Decapitation treat flesh as a tool to be manipulated, to be controlled, and destroyed to achieve some means, to be transformed. Outside of the more literal slaughterhouse framing, Cattle Decapitation has plenty of additional examples of some authority or systemic identity applying destructive somatic violence as a science. From the 2004 album Humanure, again, these titles are insane, we have the track Applied Human Defragmentation. The lyrics here include, "Within my quarters where I study the similarities between human and animal, these hands have damned this flesh to obscurity and sufferance." As well as, "Applied human defragmentation taken apart and repieced, defragment complete, in the name of science, disturbing life's natural balance to work the flesh." Now, this particular song seems to be lyrically about a scientist experimenting on human bodies to create a human that cannot die by piecing together different human body parts in absurd and grotesque configurations. How different is this really from Videodrome? In Videodrome, the Spectacular Optical Corporation and Barry Convex are experimenting with changing the biology of their human subjects to create something new, even to create some changed human that fits their idea of what the ideal North American should be. The tumor that Videodrome signal creates is transformative. It is the proof of the transformation of humans from one state to another, and it's the sign of the individual's loss in the conflict between the forces of Spectacular Optical's systemized violence and the individual. The tumor is systemized transformational violence manifest in the body. There are many instances of Cattle Decapitation's lyrics that embrace these themes of systemized transformational violence, also central to Videodrome, and they're great examples of why Cattle Decapitation is an excellent specific musical analog, the band that ties this film to the metal canon. Cattle Decapitation's legitimacy as an extreme metal act also legitimizes Videodrome as an extreme metal film. One more Cattle Decapitation quote, this time focusing on the commodification of flesh, because core to the mission of Videodrome is to show the consequences of divorcing flesh from the individual who inhabits it. When the flesh becomes an object, then it can be weaponized, and it becomes an object once the individual who inhabits the flesh is controlled by the Videodrome signal, once the individual is objectified. So, from the 2009 album The Harvest Floor, we have this line from Cattle Decapitation's The Product Alive. Itemized flesh, scanned inventory, a New Testament in greed, taking count. Humanity is the product, ever expanding the marketplace, dissolving the commonwealth. Just another example of Cattle Decapitation's ability to create this imagery of flesh as a product, a commodity, a tool. So obviously, over a 30-year history, not all of a band's songs are going to align with the themes of an 89-minute-long movie made in 1983, but these and other examples from the Cattle Decapitation catalog help to make a strong argument for a match. Flesh weaponized, technology as an accelerant of post-human evolution via systems, not randomness or personal agency, and the horror of being transformed by cold systems against your will, with the body as a battleground. Structurally, we've got a pretty strong case as well, just beyond thematically. Cattle Decapitation absolutely knows the relentless drive of the Deathgrind sound. Put on any Cattle Decapitation album, and you'll experience some crushing aggression and escalation. But you'll also get musical diversity in many of their albums and find some sludgier, groovier stuff, like on my personal favorite Cattle Decapitation album, Monolith of Inhumanity. But the fact that Cattle Decapitation has the ability to musically stray from pure Deathgrind and utilizes some sludgier or groovier or more progressive composition sometimes actually strengthens the match between Cattle Decapitation and Videodrome. As I mentioned earlier, Videodrome is not a 30-minute-long splatterfest. Its pacing is relentless, its scenes are quick, and the story and the conflict explode through the entirety of the runtime. But the actual moments of body horror in Videodrome have the tendency to involve slow motions and action. The body horror is the most contemplative part of the film's pacing in a lot of ways. It's the slow hand movements as Max Wren reaches into his guts. It's this sort of slow, grinding terror that actually works pretty well for a comparison to the moments of sludginess in Cattle Decapitation's music, although both the band and the film are still explosive. This isn't full-on sludge metal or doom or post-metal. This isn't something like Neurosis or Crowbar or something like that, but it dips into a kind of sludge-flavored Deathgrind. In any case, what we're doing here isn't literal sonic mirroring between a film and a band, but there's definitely more of a functional and structural argument to be made for this pairing that goes beyond vibes and aesthetics. Functionally, there is a lot of Cattle Decapitation that stages a conflict between systems and individuals for the control of flesh. Structurally, Cattle Decapitation achieves this through consistent lyrical themes and horrific imagery, but also enough musical variation to maintain Deathgrind level aggression while also underscoring the pummeling aggression with heavy grooves and some more progressive and technical songwriting than typical grindcore, similar to the technical excellence and mastery of tone seen in Videodrome. So, Cattle Decapitation and Videodrome. It's a pretty strong match. So that's it. That's it. Videodrome, Deathgrind, and Cattle Decapitation. There's so much in this film that I couldn't even properly address. All of the imagery associated with the relation between perception and reality, for example. It's not an accident that the front for Barry Convex's Weapons Corporation is Spectacular Optical, the eyeglasses company. At one point, there's a side conversation between a random customer and a Spectacular Optical employee about how the customer just won't be able to see without this prescription for these glasses. Every other line spoken by Brian Oblivion also is about the nature of perception and reality and how the television screen is becoming an extension of the human body, how the screen is now, as he says, the retina of the mind's eye. There's also the entire idea of the cathode ray mission as a place, which is I don't know how to describe it. It's like a combination soup kitchen and television cafe where the film's underclass goes to eat soup and watch TV because, as Bianca Oblivion says, that's how people get replugged back into society. There's just so much that's satirically dystopian in an aggressive way. And that scene in particular, the cathode ray mission, is truly an amazing visual and conceptual set piece for the movie. This movie is really an incredible piece of heavy metal art, and it can be watched and rewatched, spun multiple times, right? Okay, now that the analysis is finished, I want to end with some fun stuff. I'm calling this segment Band Practice Tangents. If you've been to a metal band practice, you know that random tangents contribute to the mythology of heavy metal as it's written by artists and enjoyers of metal. And I think that film is no different. So here are some quick tangents that I want to have for every film in our heavy metal canon. These are the kind of conversations that you have at band practice. First, the "if it bleeds, we can kill it" heaviest line in the movie. If it bleeds, we can kill it. Definitely one of the most metal lines in any film, maybe even ever. We'll do Predator eventually. That's on the list. For Videodrome, it has to be "Long Live the New Flesh." It's visceral, it's compact, it's memorable, it's basically a heavy metal album title. That's the energy it brings. It could totally be the name of a Deathgrind album. I have a potential runner-up here as "I am the video word made flesh," which it's a great line. It's definitely important for the film's philosophy, but just for the punchy heaviness, "Long Live the New Flesh" is just too good. Okay, next tangent. Album art. What shot from this movie could be an album cover? For this one, I'm going with one of the last shots in the film, when Max is on the abandoned ship in the harbor at the end, and he hallucinates the TV with Nikki telling him to kill himself, to kill the old flesh. He shoots himself on the TV, and the TV explodes with organs and intestines coming out of it. That shot, mid-explosion, screenshot that, freeze frame that, intestines flying out of an exploding TV, that's the album cover right there. I'm clicking on that album if it's on a streaming app, right? I had a runner-up for this one that's not metal. There's a really interesting shot after Max has killed his partners and escaped. He's walking through an alley behind his office building. In the alley, two men are moving a door with a window frame on the door. Max walks past them, and for a second we can see Max in front of the windows on the door as it's being moved, and the long extent of the alleyway behind everyone is seen through the windows. That shot, I still haven't quite figured out what it means, but it felt intentional. Maybe Max is fully on the other side of the lens now. Maybe that's the metaphor, the visual metaphor there. There's no way that the shot wasn't deliberate, because it's not like Cronenberg just let some actual workers keep working and moving doors through an alley while he was filming. My interpretation is, I think it's something to do with being on the other side of the lens, but let me know if you think it's something else. That shot, if it's really properly framed, could be like a prog rock album cover from the 70s. But for heavy metal album cover, I'm going with the exploding TV for my pick for metal album artwork. Okay, next, the mosh pit moment, heaviest scene in the movie. This is a hard one for me because the film just continues to ramp up in intensity for 89 minutes. So I feel like the answer should be the final scene where Max shoots himself. However, I'm going to go on instinct here and say that for me, the heaviest moment in the movie is when Max hallucinates that he transforms Harlan's hand into a grenade and then blows up Harlan. We're definitely supposed to realize by now that Max is fully hallucinating, but it's totally believable that what probably happened was one way or another, he killed Harlan, right? Probably by blowing him up, since bystanders outside commented on the explosion, and that may not actually be part of the hallucination, but I think the body horror was a hallucination. Somehow he blew up Harlan. In any case, though, analysis aside, the hand grenade was like at the same time a crazy, insane pun, as well as bloody and insane. It was just wild. It's not just a metal scene, but it was really heavy as fuck. This tangent is obviously subjective. That's the point of the tangents. I've talked about the difference between something being metal and something being heavy. So this tangent is purely opinion-based, and that's why it's in the band practice tangent segment. That's what this section is for. We did the analysis. Now we're doing the tangents. All right, next one is Metal Manifest. What guitar best embodies this movie? This is an 80s movie, but to me it doesn't really feel like one. I don't know how to explain it, but it feels like it's more thoughtful than a lot of, but not all of 80s horror movies. It feels more like kind of a boundary pushing 70s movie to me, maybe early 90s because of the technological aspect. So between the wild psychosomatic warfare being waged in the movie and the mutated bodies and their wild imagery, I think for this one, for what guitar best embodies this movie, I'm going with an all-black Ibanez Iceman guitar. It's a very wild shape from the late 70s. I think it's a good fit for this. All right, yeah, these tangents are vibe-based. I did the analysis. Now we're just throwing these thoughts out there. That's the point. Videodrome is an all-black Ibanez Iceman. Okay, next, I didn't originally plan on doing this next one as a tangent, but this tangent is directly inspired by Videodrome, and while I was thinking about the other metal movies on my to-do list, I realized that this one actually applies to most, if not all, of the movies. This tangent is the Brian Oblivion heaviest character name in the movie. So named after this film's character, Brian Oblivion. In case you didn't catch that, it's O''Blivion. Like an Irish emptiness or something. I don't know. It's ridiculous, and it's worthy of being the namesake of this particular band practice tangent. I'm going with Brian Oblivion for this tangent and not his daughter Bianca Oblivion, because honestly, neither of the first names really feel particularly metal, but Bianca sounds like a very classy name, like maybe a little too clean for metal. It's really the Oblivion part that pushes this into metal absurdity anyway. Just a wild thing to name a character. For this film, obviously my pick is Brian Oblivion because I named the tangent after him. So, moving on. Next up, venue vibes. Would this movie play a bar, a small theater, or a stadium? Videodrome definitely doesn't play a stadium if it's a touring band. It's too weird, it's too niche, it's very artsy, so I could see it playing a small theater, maybe. Also, you know what? I did read that this was Cronenberg's first bigger budget studio movie, so he's kind of coming out of his bar show, real cult film stage. For Videodrome, I'm going small theater, coming out of the bar show stage and into the small theater stage. But here's a real tangent. I read that the budget for this film was about $5.9 million, and this was Cronenberg's film with the highest budget up to that point. For comparison, his previous film, Scanners, had a budget of $4.1 million, so almost $2 million less. Scanners is great, but man, the jump in production quality and even just storytelling between Scanners and Videodrome, I think is massive. Guess what though? Videodrome cost $5.9 million to make. It only grossed $2.1 million. That's kind of a bomb. And that's insane to me. I don't understand how this film only made $2.1 million and Scanners made $14 million. 14. I checked that on multiple box office stats websites because I couldn't believe it. Again, nothing against Scanners, but you're telling me that Scanners did 7 times what Videodrome did? That's crazy to me. I mean, I don't think I even really mentioned the performances in Videodrome all that much, but James Woods as Max Wren and Deborah Harry as Nikki Brand, those 2 performances alone really elevate Videodrome to the status of like a serious film. James Woods nails the paranoid, like, I know the stove is hot, but I want to touch it anyway, like kind of energy of Max Wren. And Deborah Harry, for me, kind of came out of nowhere when I first saw this. I looked at her filmography, and I have to admit, I don't think I've seen anything else that she's been in. But now I know that if Deborah Harry is credited in a film, then there will be at least one good performance in it, because she was awesome in Videodrome. All right, moving on. This film gets small theater for this tangent. Okay, next, opener or headliner. Is Videodrome an opener or a headlining act? Like I said, it's kind of niche, but also I don't really want to see anything else after Videodrome. I think Long Live the New Flesh is like the end of the show. That's the showstopper. That's the end of the night, I think. So I'm going a headliner on a small venue, small theater tour. Okay, next up, limited pressing vinyl color. If the score for this film, the score or the soundtrack, got a limited release on vinyl, what color would it be? For this one, my initial thought was to do a kind of blue to match like the standard poster for the film, or maybe a reddish color to match the vibes of the Videodrome set in the film. But I think I got it. It's neither of those. This vinyl would be clear Coke bottle vinyl, but with some gray cloud effect in it. I think that really gets at the altered perception of reality through a screen. That's my official take, but I could also see as a secondary color going like full solid white with a bunch of gray specks in it to look like TV static. Shout out to Howard Shore, by the way, who did the music for this film, the composer. Lots of pulsing tones in dramatic scenes that kind of make you think you're receiving a signal from the score of this film as opposed to listening to music, which works really well for this film. And Howard Shore is not just some small-time composer. He did the Lord of the Rings movies, and he's done a bunch of Scorsese movies too. But I guess he's also worked with Cronenberg a bunch, so they're good pairing. All right, next tangent. The penultimate tangent. This is the non-metal double feature. If you're going to plan a double feature with this and a non-metal film, what non-metal film do you watch? I actually have put a lot of thought into this, particularly for this film. One of my hot takes for cinema is that in my headcanon, there is an unofficial trilogy of films where you can watch as media becomes more sensationalized and dangerous, and society collapses because of it. This is one of my hottest takes in all of film. In my personal headcanon, I view these 3 films as an unofficial trilogy that's a commentary on media's role in society. First film in the trilogy is Network from 1975. I don't think that's a metal film. I haven't seen it in a bit. Maybe I have to think about it a little more. I don't think it's metal, but it is one of the best films of the 70s, and therefore it's one of the best films ever made. Somehow it's super underrated as a black comedy. It's amazing. Second film in the trilogy is this, Videodrome. Third film in the trilogy is the 80s version of The Running Man, the Schwarzenegger one. Those 3 films to me are a trilogy, and they're all amazing. So for my official non-metal double feature pick, I'm going with Network into Videodrome. I strongly recommend next time you're rained in or snowed in or whatever and you have nothing to do, or if you get the flu and you have a sick day, at some point in your life do this. Watch all 3 back to back in that order in their release order. Network into Videodrome into The Running Man. Okay, final tangent. The breaking the law heaviness scale 1 to 10. Okay, I've mentioned that this show is not about ranking films according to heaviness. This is serious. This is about rigorous definitions of metal and frameworks and metal theory. Metal is a mode, heaviness is just a feeling. But guess what? This is the band practice tangent segment of the show, and feeling matters in metal. We did the analysis segment, and I didn't once say that Videodrome is heavy as fuck. We kept feelings out of the analysis. Great. Heaviness in metal should not be totally ignored, though. And this is the segment for shooting from the hip. So, how heavy is this film? No explanations. On the breaking the law heaviness scale of 1 to 10, I'm giving Videodrome an 8. No explanation. Done. All right, that's all I got. The show's email address is in the description. It's heavyasfilm@gmail.com. Hit me up if you have thoughts. Importantly, if you have any suggestions for metal cinema to possibly consider. Like I mentioned, I have a list of about 15 films I'm testing this show out on, and I'm pretty rigorous and strict with how to qualify a film as metal cinema for this show, but hit me up if you have thoughts. Subscribe to this show on your favorite podcast platform, and remember to check out Heavy as Film on Substack and Patreon for these episodes in newsletter format and for bonus content coming soon. Substack and Patreon links are in the episode description. Film 1, complete, Videodrome, Deathgrind, Cattle Decapitation. Subscribe to the show and make sure you get the next episode. But until then, long live the new flesh.